Welcome to the Actionable Futurist podcast, a show all about the near-term future with practical and actionable advice from a range of global experts to help you stay ahead of the curve. Every episode answers the question, what's the future of? With voices and opinions that need to be heard. Your host is international keynote speaker and actionable futurist Andrew Grill.
My guest today is Mark Pinsent, Managing Director Europe for the Hoffman Agency, a leading technology PR company. Mark graduated in 1992 with a degree in information and computing science, but his creative streak saw him enter the world of marketing and communications. He says he spent 28 happy years developing and delivering campaigns for B2B and B2C brands in the UK and internationally. Mark's coming to us today from his location agnostic office in France. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Andrew. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Now, we worked out off air that we actually met in person in London many years ago at the Hospital Club. Many people that are frequent listeners to the Hospital Club will remember I've had Sue Walter on, who was the CEO back then. I really miss that club, but that was great that we actually connected. And when I heard you were leading up Hoffman in Europe and Liam reached out, I said, well, we should get Mark on the podcast.
Yeah, no, it was good to meet there. It's nice to reminisce about that. As we were saying, it's such a great environment. And I suppose in some ways that kind of relates to our chat today about the ability to meet up wherever and find yourself in nice places to chat and network and work, and that should be something I think we should all be looking forward to getting back to, and it's going to be interesting to see some of the models that emerge because, as you say, sadly the Hospital Club closed down, which is a real pity because I think it could have been one of those places we would have gravitated back to very quickly.
Well, I miss it being there, and I'm no work-at-home newbie. Neither are you. We'll talk about that. I've lived a very nomadic existence. Even when I was at IBM as a partner, I didn't use the IBM offices. I would often go to the Hospital Club with clients and staff because it was a nicer place. And we'll talk about the notion of a third place, but that became my third place. It wasn't the office. It wasn't home. So when lockdown happened and everyone was sent home, I'm sure you and I had all the kit we needed, and we kind of thought, what's the fuss about? Of course you can work from home.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the way, largely, I suppose, I've been working for all the time I've been living in France, which is 19 years now. This idea of I've always needed a good office at home set up because I'd spend some of my time here, some of my time traveling, and then some of my time in our offices in different parts of Europe and around the world. And so when the pandemic came along and suddenly we were all locked down, I spoke to people at clients, and there was a real headache there because they said everybody's got a desktop computer. We've suddenly got to find hundreds of laptops and furnish people with a kit that allows them to work remotely. And you suddenly thought, actually, if you're in that situation, that's a huge issue. Whereas for myself, but also how we'd set up our business, flexibility being there already, everybody had all of the kit. And funnily enough, we did go out in the first month or so of the pandemic when we realised that people were going to be at home for a while, and said to the whole team, what is there that we could help you out with that will make your home office a bit better to work in, or your home setup. And we had a couple of people with that traditional, the things you'd expect. Somebody wanted a desk, they didn't have a desk at home. Somebody wanted a proper comfortable chair because they knew they were going to be sitting there for hours each day. But as much as that, there's people saying, well, actually, I'd love a really nice coffee machine because I really could do some decent coffee. One guy wanted a whole load of new plants for his house because he said, I just need some greenery around me. And it was nice to kind of get the sense of, well, actually, people are well set up then to work if they're asking for things that will just kind of wrap around that. We did have one colleague asked for a ukulele, which was an interesting one. She got it, but I'm not sure any of her housemates were particularly impressed with that as a piece of kit. But yes, I think that kind of was a reflection of the fact that we were quite well set up for remote working already, and so we found it relatively easy to transition into that. And it certainly wasn't the case for every organisation, I'm sure. The
companies that have actually been successful out of the pandemic, a lot of tech companies, but they only had the setup there and also had the mindset to work in a remote agnostic, as you say, way. But what's the best thing about working away from the office for you?
I think there's a whole host of things that are the best thing. I think sometimes it can be just the quiet and the ability to focus. Actually, I know here, and that's a double-edged sword because sometimes that's a real positive. I can sit here, make sure I'm not particularly distracted. I live in a relatively quiet place and really focus on the tasks at hand. But then the flip side is obviously I don't have that opportunity just to, meet up with people or quickly bounce a few ideas around. So I think, there's double-edged sword really in all of this. The flexibility for me is, I suppose the strength for me is the ability to be productive wherever I am, whether that's here at home, in the office, somewhere in between, or even on transportation. I guess that's something we'll talk about as well, because I've become, since the pandemic, I used to fly around Europe a lot, but since the pandemic, wherever I possibly can, I'm getting the train rather than flying, because A, I think it's obviously much better for the environment, but B, it's a much more productive environment for me. I can work on a 4-hour train journey, whereas 4 hours spent going through an airport, getting on a flight, getting off the other end is largely unproductive. So I think for me, the overall advantage is flexibility, the ability to be productive wherever I am, sometimes the ability to really focus on a task and get deeply into it. Other times, the chance to tap into my colleagues in the team and speak to clients and really get inspired by them. So I don't think there's a single answer to what's good about it. I guess it's about designing it to work for you.
I talk about the future work being the 3 Ps: people, place, and purpose. And when I talk about place, I say that's where the best work gets done. And so if you are a laboratory worker, the best place where work gets done is in the lab. And the example I gave, if I'm about to walk on stage as a keynote speaker and I'm in the hotel foyer, need to redo my slides, that's where the best work gets done. So do you subscribe to that sort of view?
I feel very privileged in a way that the nature of my work allows me to be really, really flexible, because very clearly that's not the case for everybody. Some people are very tied to the physical place, so they have to carry out that work. But you're right; it almost becomes a balance of those things. So I think about somebody like a surgeon, and obviously they're quite tied to a location to do their surgery, but clearly the purpose in their work is the thing that almost compensates for the fact that they maybe don't have flexibility in location, because they know they're doing really, really important work. So it's going to differ, sort of that balance for everybody. For me, that ability to be productive in any place is one of the important factors of me enjoying my work. And as I say, I feel very privileged that we can, literally pick up our laptop. As long as you've got a fairly decent connection and your laptop, then, it doesn't matter where we work and we can be productive. And that gives us that ability to, create the optimal mix for us. But you're right. Yeah. That the idea that, that we can produce our best work irrespective of where it might be, or put ourselves in a location that inspires that best work, I think is really powerful for kind of what in the old Microsoft parlance would have been the information workers like we are, I guess.
People call us nomads because we work anywhere. What's been the greatest learning? I mean, you said you had a lot of people in the office asking for things, and clearly your clients would have a range of experience at working from home. And you mentioned before that, a lot of them had desktops and so they had to go out and buy laptops. But was it kind of a checklist of things that your experiences brought to the party where you said, here are the 5 things you've just got to do to make sure you can continue working effectively and efficiently?
Making sure that people had the right kit in the broadest possible terms. Obviously we talk about a laptop and a mobile and a good internet connection, etc. But you've got to be comfortable. You've got to, you can't spend all day perched on a sofa with the laptop on your knee, feeling like it's going to be the most productive environment. So one of the key things for me is, and I suppose again, you had to make sure that I wasn't reflecting my position, my length of career, my experience onto much more junior people who had no experience of a situation like this. So we had to work out, okay, people, friends, colleagues of ours, juniors, they're in flat shares, they're in house shares, they're all fighting for somewhere to work. So that making sure that they know they can ask us to help them out, define a little workspace in their home environment was really, really important. So there is the kit and the making sure people were set up with a really good home office. But I also think it's some of the ways we work with people. And again, particularly talking about junior people, one of the most fundamental learnings for me is this idea of managing people by outcomes. Really, it's making people know exactly what they're expected to produce on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and then giving them the freedom to find the right way to produce those outcomes, because it can't be any more about presenteeism or how long you've seen somebody sitting in the office and assuming that they're doing really good work. It has to be a slightly different way of managing people and defining the task list for them. So I think that very clarity in communicating that to people is really, really key. Making sure people are explicitly understand what they're expected to produce, as I say, on whatever the cadence is, it's daily, weekly, or monthly, or quarterly, whatever. So that everybody has the ability to say, I've done my job well, and I've done what you've asked of me, and whether that's just to tick the box and move forward, or get a promotion, or evolve and learn. That's absolutely essential. Is that people understanding what's expected of them. So, and again, hopefully we were some way along managing in that way much more, but I think this has really accelerated that, and so this is the only way that you can manage people. And I think through doing that, it actually, and holding people accountable for that as well, that's what is the foundation for then the freedoms and the flexibility, because as long as you can trust somebody to do their job, I really don't care where they are. I quite like it when somebody suddenly gets on a call and they turn up in a different environment. I'm like, okay, where are you today? You're in a cafe, you're in the gym. Then we get people doing that. They say, well, actually, I've come down to the gym to work here for an hour because then I can get into a class that I wouldn't have otherwise been able to make. Like, great. That's exactly what I want to hear, is people using flexibility. But as long as we see that they're, producing what we're asking of them, and then I think that works.
You're a very different type of manager because you've already been doing this for so long that when a change came along, you were ready for it, especially in the way that you manage it. And I want to unpack that a bit. We've had the Elon Musk of the world saying you've got to be in the office at least 40 hours a week. You've had leaders of banks say we want people back in. I've spoken to a lot of people over the last 2 years about this, and it has changed over the pandemic as we thought we were locked down for a bit longer, and then as we were released. The other thing I found was that the presenteeism became an issue, because I actually had friends, and if they're listening to the podcast, they know who they are, that bought mouse wigglers, so that basically it would minutely move the mouse so that their terminal or their Slack channel or whatever said they were always online, because the way they were being managed was not for outcomes. The way they were being managed was, are you sitting at your desk? Other guests that said something about Zoom calls were, when we were online, we were just replacing a meeting with a Zoom call, which is synchronous. So you have to be in front of the screen, you have to be there for the hour-long Zoom call. What you've described is an asynchronous way of working. This is the task. I don't care how you get it done, but we need it done by this time. But I'm going to leave you alone to go and do it. And if you need to contact me, I don't expect you to answer me at 7:00 at night. So again, your style as a manager that was already kind of baked in before the pandemic happened, how did that help you manage these people for success when you don't see them every day in person?
I'm not going to claim that we've solved that completely. And I think one of the challenges that actually came with the pandemic was that, as you say, every meeting that was a meeting, and many that weren't actually suddenly became a call. So our diaries started filling up with this stream of Zoom calls. And I'm a massive believer in the concept of deep work. Cal Newport wrote a really great book, and I loved it, because just one of those books you read and you completely get everything he's saying about, you need to produce high quality work. You need to carve out the time that's free of distractions to get your head into it, focus on it. And that's the most effective way. And I think we intuitively know that's right. Have these things that sit on your to-do list and you never get around to, you try and chip away and it doesn't really happen. But if you clear some space and you spend 2 hours on it, then you get it done, and you get it done to a really good quality. And as I say, I'm a big believer in that. And so I recognize that we have to make sure that there's enough space in people's diaries to allow them to do that. And I think one of the problems with the pandemic was that those spaces just didn't appear. Your day was suddenly fragmented. It was a bunch of calls with half an hour in between, 45 minutes in between. And I don't think we've come out of that bit yet. I was chatting to a client. I went to one of my first sort of at-scale physical events last week. It was the client's Dealmaker event, big, 500-600 people there. It was really great to get back in a room with people and speak to them. And I was chatting to Abby, the marketing director there, and said, I think we've got some work to do to almost reverse out of some of those habits that became established in the pandemic, to allow people the freedom to go to an event like that. That was interesting to me last week, because I had to clear the diary for the whole day. It was a whole day event, and that was a little bit of a struggle, because I had to then go, I won't be on that call. I'm going to have to let them know. And could we push that one out? And suddenly clearing the diary to create that space was a bit challenging. And I think that's the case for all of us at the moment, that we have diaries that have become so full of calls that we've got to work out a way that, okay, if things are slightly returning back to normal but different, then how do we make sure that people have got the space in their diary to really focus on those activities? Because what I don't want to happen is if people's day is just filling up with calls and those outcomes that we've asked them to deliver are suddenly becoming the work they do outside of working hours, because that's the time they can carve out to, really find those productive hours. That will not be a good outcome from the pandemic. So I don't think we've solved it yet. I know what we need to have for people. As I say, I know we need people to have those spaces in the diaries that they can really focus on work. And there's a bit of work I think we need to do to kind of work with our clients to maybe say, right, okay, we got in a habit of having a weekly call during the pandemic because that was important. We wanted to touch base. Can we make it bi-weekly? Do we go back to a monthly? Do we try and get together on a quarterly basis and just work out the ways that we do make sure that the rhythm of the day is working for us and allowing us to produce that high quality work?
I think what you talk about in clearing the diary is important, and I'm a freelancer, so I'm no longer in a corporate office anymore, so I have to rely on my friends for intelligence. And what I'm hearing time after time is they're going back into the office on that 2 or 3 days. They then spend the rest of the day on Zoom calls because half the office is actually out of the office. And here's the other kicker, because they haven't got a Zoom room set up with a pan and tilt camera that follows you around, they have to go into separate meeting rooms because there's feedback on Zoom and everything else. So that just blows my mind that, back to the 3 Ps, people, place and purpose. They're now questioning the purpose of why are we going into the office to sit in a meeting room to have a Zoom call on my own when I could have done that at home. So one of my, and she'll know who I'm talking about, very intelligent friends is saying, actually, when I go into the office, I'm going to clear the diary because when I'm in there to meet people 2 or 3 days a week, I don't want to be on Zoom calls. I want to have those serendipitous conversations. I want to bump into someone and not have to say, oh, I've got to jump on a call. So to your point with your client conversation about unlearning some of those pandemic habits, do we need to have purpose to go into the office to not do calls? I actually said, well, just I got in trouble last week. I was on stage at a client and I suggested that he allows people to go back into the office and not do as much work. What I meant to say was not do the same work. And he said, oh, I'm not sure I'd like that. But it was more a case of freeing them up when they're in the office to bump into someone. How does that work, or am I just being crazy?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I've been in that exact same situation when we did start getting together back in the office. And I just remember sitting there with our guys in London. I went across to London and we had a client call and it was a Zoom call. And we all sat there in the same space on our individual laptops doing the call, and it was just like, whoa, this is mad. And not only obviously was it problematic because suddenly you get echoes from all over the place and you can hear other people, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, okay, something's not quite right here. Now why don't we at least all gather around one laptop so the client can see that we're all together, whatever it might be. But that you're right, we were still in that habitual state of this is how we work, we haven't cleared the diary, we haven't changed anything, so we've got that call, we've got to do it. And I think that's a great your friend's position of clear the diary so that when you actually go in the office, you're doing the positive things about being around people, which is casual conversations, chats, bumping into each other, messing around, bit of banter, getting to know people on a personal level. We've obviously had people join our business during the pandemic that we hadn't met face to face, and you've got to get to know these guys. You can do so much over a Zoom call, but it's not until you bump into them. I mean, I have this because we've met. I'm quite tall, so it's one of those things when I meet people face to face that I've never met before, other than on a Zoom call, the first thing they go is, "Oh my God, you're taller than I thought you were going to be." And it's so there's the human side of it, and that's really, really important. So I love that idea of trying to get people to have a clear space in the diary to be in the office and have those serendipity that you talked about, for sure. I subscribe to that.
So just let's noodle on that a bit about the tech. So as you said, not the first person, so you go back to the office and you have to go to separate rooms. Now, I'll share with you that back in 1994, I did my master's degree in Adelaide, Australia, and they had actually had a very progressive way of tele-teaching. We had 3 remote locations, old laboratories that had been gutted and turned into labs. Curved desks, each desk had a microphone and a switch and a pan and tilt camera. So you turn on your microphone and the camera zooms to you. This is back in 1994. I know that even Logitech and Zoom have done things Is it time to retrofit the offices to have a proper Zoom room? So if you're in the office, you have a great experience. If you're at home, you also have a great experience. And also the people that are at home have a great experience about the people in the office.
We had a client call, a standing client call that we have on a weekly basis with a client of ours that's in Sweden. And obviously, again, we've all been on individual Zooms, but they're back in the office now. And it's just, it wasn't everybody. There's quite a few people on that call, but 3 of them were sitting in the same room in their office on with a proper video conferencing setup, high quality. And you could just see there was a nice dynamic between them, and it was lovely to see them together. And actually, it was the thing that on today's call, because they're based in southern Sweden, and traditionally we go over there maybe once or twice a year for a meeting. And of course, we'd fallen out of that habit, or weren't able to do that during the pandemic. But seeing them together in their office today was the thing that prompted me to say, we should start looking for a date. We should start, when's our next trip over? Let's look, and we're looking for a date later in the year. So I think that is a good idea, is making sure that people know there is a collective way in going to have the video calls. Because, I do think, for years, you'll know this, obviously, as you've been around as long as I have, video conferencing, was that ever going to take off? Really? I did some work with, Noel Edmonds and his video conference company back in the day. And it was always that, it's never going to be really as good as meeting in person. And then we've been forced into it. So we've all become used to video meetings, and I think there's some goodness in that as well, but we need to take those opportunities to get together and meet collectively where we can, even if 1 or 2 people are still on remote from us, for sure.
I want to talk about working in an agile way, because we've had the 2 years of the pandemic, we're having to unlearn some things, and something struck me that you said you've been having a weekly call. So we all wait for that week to update what we're doing. Now, in agile methodology, you probably use something like a Trello board to basically say how things are going. Does that work in an organization like yours, or does that work with clients, so that rather than them having to wait and everyone come together and clear diaries, right, let's have the update, that again, in an asynchronous way, you can look at a dashboard and go, that's red, that's orange, that's green. Can companies use the pandemic as a way to reset and truly, rather than being agile, they do agile?
Funnily enough, the client I'm talking about earlier, the Swedish-based client, we use Trello with those guys, and we have done since before the pandemic. And it's because of the nature of that program, actually, but it's something that, again, was great to have in place and take those learnings from for other clients as well, because it's a content creation process, and it's very editorial. We write content for their blog, for their newsroom, editorial as well. And so the Trello is literally our workflow for content, everything from an idea all the way through to a published piece of content and every step in between. And so that was already in place. So we do check that on a regular basis, and that Trello board is essentially our agenda for that meeting. We just sit there in front of the Trello board and run through and highlight any issues or anything that's got stuck or whatever it might be. So again, when we kind of got into a need to work remotely with all of our clients, we had to very quickly work out, well, how do we put that dashboard in place? And sometimes the client drives it. Some of our clients use Monday, others use Asana, lots of them are on Slack. We use Trello in a number of different instances as well, some just like a sort of Google Doc that we can all look at. But pretty much for every one of our clients now, and it's become embedded in our behavior, we have a live working doc that everybody can look at any point to see the status of activities, update, put notes on it, create alerts and whatever. And that wasn't something we had in place for every client. Certainly there were clients who were very traditional in, we'd meet once a month physically. For that meeting there'd be a monthly report we'd run through, there'd be a printed agenda, all of those things, and that does seem to have disappeared largely, and I think it's a real positive. Certainly it reduces the amount of time that we spend on some of the administration around accounts, because everything is captured in the tracker, in the work in progress document. You've got tabs for active actions, you've got tabs for coverage generated, completed actions, it's all there. So the reports are there, the live views there, everybody can interact in it. And I do think that's a real positive. But everybody's selling their own platform, so you do end up with this slight craziness of, right, what am I in today? Is it a Google Doc? Is it Trello? Is it Monday? Where am I going?
It's great to hear that collaboration is actually making some leaps and bounds. Back when I was at IBM, I ran a collaboration practice, and we go into firms, probably many of the ones that you deal with, and they'd have a smorgasbord of different tools that they would use, but they'd all say it isn't working. I think the pandemic forced us, because we were in a distributed workforce environment, we had to collaborate online and we had to learn how to use shared Google Docs and those sort of things. Maybe some of the things that you and I were talking about 5 or 6 years ago that might happen one day, there's been an acceleration, and that's a good thing.
I definitely think it has accelerated, and it's, even as you said at the start, I did do a information and computer science degree way back in the day, so I've got a kind of inherent techiness about me, but I've also got a slight traditionalist dinosaur about me as well. So I was always the worst one for creating a document locally on my laptop and saving it in my files and folders, and everyone else wondering where it was, and so it has definitely forced me into becoming a complete convert to the shared document. It's like, we just make the shared document, everybody can feed into it, it's live, there's only one. Right, that's brilliant. So I think it's definitely accelerated the use of those tools, changes in behaviours, made them familiar to people as well. I mean, there's still a part of me that just wonders where it is. I'm kind of like, it's somewhere in the cloud. It's very visually minded, so I do see this document floating around somewhere that we're all connected to, but I've no real sense of where it is. But it is good, and we are very collaborative in the way we work. So when we're writing document with internally and with our clients, and I think that's important as well. For instance, if we are writing, take a simple example, a news announcement, a press release for one of our clients, the fact that everybody can be inputting, commenting, highlighting bits, changing their quote, whatever it might be, it just makes it a much more efficient process to get to the end result. And then there is one definitive document that everybody knows is the only one that we're working on. So it's definitely helpful. I am a convert for sure.
We'll always remember the different version control. I remember the emails that re.
Yeah.
That's got to
final. Yeah, for sure.
I talked about the hospital club as being my third place. Just want to unpack that. And for those who are not familiar with the third place, in his 2009 book, Celebrating the Third Place, sociologist Ray Oldenburg coined the term to describe places where people spend their time between home, their first place, and work, their second place. Now, Howard Schultz, who is he is again the Starbucks CEO, adopted this phrase a few years later to describe how he wanted Starbucks to become that third place. But do you believe these third places might become more popular as people want to change from being at home or in the office?
I don't know. In a way, it makes a third place sound like another place that we need to go to, whereas actually my third place feels much more flexible than that. It's just, as you mentioned before, kind of where I happen to be at the time, and knowing that I can be productive in that place. So I get why Starbucks CEO would want Starbucks to become the de facto third place. I'm sure that it will sell a lot more coffee and buns, but I don't know that for me it becomes. I don't know if I want to define it as another place, as a third place, because that just almost ties it too much to a location to me. I want to know that between the first two places that I can be as productive as I am in either one of those, and so I think that's the main thing for me is that sense of, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm wanting everybody to be productive every moment of wherever they might be. It's not that at all. It's about the ability to be productive. If you're out and about and you take the decision that actually, today's a lovely day, so I want to move myself out so I can be a bit closer to fresh air, I can sit by a river, that's cool, that's fine by me. As long as you feel like you're going to be connected online, be able to pick the tasks that you've got that will suit that environment. So it may not be that you go, actually, you know what, I've got 2 hours free of Zoom calls. That's the perfect time to go to that other environment and sit and write a document, because I know I don't actually have to rely on a really, really good connection. In fact, it might be great if I'm unconnected for a couple of hours to focus on that thing. So for me, it should be about every place as much as a third place, and our ability to shape our work that allows us to be really, really productive in those environments. And this is one of the things I mentioned before about my travel. I used to fly a lot, little short haul flights around Europe and in and out of London. I'd be flying, I don't know, 3 or 4 return flights on a monthly basis almost, and it's tiring and it's hard and it's just draining, and airports aren't the brilliant experience when you actually want to just get through one on a flight. You're distracted by everything that an airport tries to throw at you. So once we've been through the pandemic, and suddenly I hadn't been doing that for a long while, I had this opportunity to think, right, okay, how do I want to change things? And I'm a dreadful romantic for train travel. I don't know what it is, but it's just kind of embedded in me, particularly transcontinental train travel. I just think it's brilliant. So the first trip one of the first trips I had as the pandemic eased was to Munich. And I just thought, I wonder if I can get there on the train. And so I live in southwest France, about an hour north of Bordeaux. And so most times I have to connect through Paris if I'm going to London or anywhere else. And sure enough, I could go from my place to Paris and then from Paris to Munich on the train. And the Paris-Munich train, there's one direct train a day. There's plenty of indirect ones and changes, but there's one really fast direct train a day, and it takes 5.5 hours. But it isn't particularly expensive because it's a European train. And, you sit there and suddenly think, wow, it's great. You've got good connection on the train. I've got 5 hours of really clear time in front of me where I can be really productive. And it was just a complete revelation for me. I was like, why have I been doing airports all of this time for this type of trip where I could actually be highly productive in a really nice environment? I found it a comfortable environment, but not only that, actually quite a sort of weirdly inspiring environment. You're looking out the window at beautiful countryside rushing past, and you're sort of, it was just slightly inspiring. So it really changed my thoughts around travel, that I now make my journey between places ensure that it is another environment where I can be working productively. Because it kind of then takes a bit of the stress out of travel as well. We've all had those times where you're sitting in an airport and you're kind of moving between security and gate, and then there's a delay and you're waiting to board. Well, you're really kind of half looking at your email, trying to cover off a few things. And then you get on the plane, you can't really get your laptop out because it's all cramped and everything. It's quite a stressful environment, particularly if you know things are going on that you'd really like to focus on. So I have just found this kind of real revelation in train travel that I love. And people I just think are really funny. But I've kind of dragged a few people along with me on it, and I'm converting people to this idea that train travel is better than plane travel for just the environment and the actual experience of it, and for being productive as well. So it all comes back to this idea that as long as I feel that I can put myself in places where I can be productive, I can focus on work, then it could be anywhere. It could be a train, it could be a park, it could be a cafe, but it doesn't have to be one of those things.
Well, I'm actually the same. So my third place, I put in air quotes because it can be anywhere. And to give you an example, so on Monday, I was at the CogX Festival up at King's Cross. They're in the Samsung building. I cleared myself a space where they have these demonstrations. I basically had my workshop there, and everyone then copied me because they thought that was a great idea. I had 1 year on the conference over there, and I wrote 3 podcast scripts, and I was so productive. This afternoon, once I finished my podcast recordings, I'm going into the Royal Overseas League. They have a lovely outdoor terrace with strong Wi-Fi, and I've got a garden party there tonight. So that'll be my third place from there. And then tomorrow I'm actually speaking to a group of school children, and on the train up and back will be my third place as well. So I'm with you. I don't want to label a third place, but the third place is definitely in between home and office, and it can be anywhere. And I've got very comfortable, I've got all the kit obviously, to work anywhere, put the music in, get the laptop out or the iPad with a keyboard, and away you go.
I think that's it, isn't it? Third place is anywhere between your home office and a work office.
Remote working like you, I've lived and worked abroad for the last 16 years. What do you believe are the benefits about locating yourself in another country?
We moved over here, as I say, 19 years ago, and it was a bit of a whim, really. My wife and I got married. She's British as well. In the UK, we'd had our first child. Our daughter was a baby, and we'd always talked about living overseas, which is just something that both of us really fancied doing. And it just seemed like the opportunity then was the right time then, or we were going to wait and we were going to get stuck into schools and stuff, and it wouldn't happen for a while. So we just said, well, let's go, and came across to France, and France was an obvious destination not too far away from the UK. I knew I was going to have to start working in a different way, working remotely, traveling. So I didn't want to be too far away from the UK, because likelihood was that a lot of my work would come from the UK. But I just loved plonking ourselves in a completely different country, a different culture, a different environment. And, it isn't far away, but it is France. And so there are differences. A new language. I wasn't a great French speaker when we arrived. There are some who would, and I'm looking at my family here, who would say that I'm still not a great French speaker, but they're all sort of natively bilingual now. I just liked the openness it gave us, the idea that you have to kind of immerse yourself in another country, you have to become integrated.
So you're an optimist like me, but it can't be all great news. What's been the hardest part of working, living in a foreign country, and how did you overcome these challenges?
Probably the obvious ones. Again, you are removing yourself from the proximity to friends, to family. There's always been difficulty there. We were very conscious, as I say, when we moved over here, that we were taking the first grandchild for both my parents and my wife's parents away to a different country, and I think they felt that was hard, and I think we probably read more into that, and certainly they've visited a lot in that time and spent a lot of time with us, and probably better quality of time with us as a family and their grandchildren than they might have if we just lived an hour or two away from them in the UK. But you're moving yourself out of a comfortable social group and a family group into a completely alien environment where you don't have any connections at all, and we literally didn't. We moved over here and moved to a small hamlet in rural France, and we knew nobody in that hamlet or anywhere else around. So it was about completely needing to integrate into that society, and that isn't easy. At first you did question it. You did ask yourself whether you've done the right thing. It takes time to build relationships, and particularly when there's another language involved. But I think we had some advantages in that. As I say, my wife was almost a fluent speaker by the time when we came out, and she certainly is now. And she's extremely chatty and social, so she immediately started chatting to everybody and getting to know everybody, which helped us. We had a small child, obviously Taya, our daughter, and then our son was born just after we arrived. So that helps because you're immediately into schools, etc. So we had the reasons to get integrated into society, and relatively quickly made some really good friends that are still really good friends now. But yeah, there were times where you did sort of go, what the hell have we done here? We've up sticks completely from our country where we were very comfortable and knew lots of people, with a small child and a dog and then another baby, and plonked ourselves in a foreign country in the middle of nowhere. What were we thinking? But I don't regret it for a second. I really don't. But yeah, it hasn't all been easy. But I think that, as you say, the optimism gets you through that, right? You always come back to, no, this will be fine. You just got to make the effort, get to know people, get out there, and it will be okay. And generally, it's proved to be the case.
So in the time we've got left, let's spend a bit of time on PR and comms, because that's your bread and butter. What makes a great PR story?
It's a really good question, because in essence, what we're interested in, what makes a great story in media, and it's trying to get our clients to get as close to that as they possibly can, which isn't always the easiest thing, because clients, want to talk about themselves and they want to talk their own products and their solutions, and we have to educate them that actually you've got to put that in the context of something which the media is interested, whether that's a societal context or a business context or a global geopolitical context, and you've got to be prepared to put your business in that context. Because if all you do, we always talk about this analogy, somebody who walks in the pub, stands on the table and starts shouting about themselves isn't the most interesting person in the place, and won't make many friends. And it's the same with businesses. If that's all you want to do is turn up and talk about yourself, then nobody's going to be interested in it. But if you find out what other people are interested in, if you ask the questions, and then you manage to shape your proposition into that. So, we talk about storytelling in our business a lot. A lot of agencies do. But I think my boss Lou Hoffman has probably analysed storytelling to a depth that few go to. And we know that the classic storytelling arcs of a protagonist, a hero, something going wrong, them coming out at the other side successful, they're not ones that businesses can generally support. They don't want to talk about the bad stuff. But actually, you know what? If you do get a business that will talk about sort of some of their failures with a small f, or the things they've learned from where they've got things wrong and how they've improved, that actually becomes a more compelling story. So the work we do with clients is always trying to, as I say, pull them along as far as possible to what genuinely is going to be a good story, bad stuff, good stuff, overcoming adversity, attaching yourself to societal need, genuinely solving problems, then that's a success for us. As I say, we don't always get there, but I suppose one of the other little phrases we often use with clients, and I don't think it's give any trade secrets away, is we don't want to communicate what you do. We want to communicate why you matter. And it's a really interesting little just change. It's like, actually, you've told us what your products are, you've told us what they do, but why should anyone care about that? What problem does that solve? And if you can get them thinking in those terms, then suddenly you start getting some potentially interesting stuff. So yeah, a PR story, a good PR story is a good story, full stop.
Yeah, I'm sure you've had clients who just said, get me on the front page of the FT. And I had an investor that did that once. And he said, we need to be on the FT. And I had a different view. And I got myself onto the different stages and I got myself into different networking groups. And then it was a case of, you need to go and talk to Andrew. And it cost us nothing and probably actually got us a more targeted approach than being on the FT. And because if someone doesn't see that story, then it doesn't actually matter at all.
The FT is a really interesting one. It reminds me of one of my favourite stories when this was back end of the 90s, and we worked, I won't name the guy because he's still around, he's still doing really, really well. But and I purely, not for any negative reasons, but he's just a really bright forward thinker. And he came to us, he was running a development agency in Richmond, relatively small company, but doing some really smart stuff at that time around intelligent agents, the kind of birth of AI, etc. And he said to us, he said, I'm going to give you a challenge. He said, I'd like us to be in the FT on a fairly regular basis, but you've got to tell me what we need to do to get in the FT. And if you do that, I'll do a pure payment by results basis. But it wasn't, we don't do payment by results generally, but he made it such a compelling offer. He said, look, if you get me in the FT, every time you get me in the FT, whatever size, whatever scale, just if we're in the FT, I'll regard that as valuable as if I'd done half a page of advertising in the Financial Times, right? And half a page of advertising in the Financial Times isn't a small amount of money. So he said, if you get me, every time you get me in, that's what I'll pay you. And we're like, okay, we'll take this challenge on. And, we got him in the FT every month for 8 months. And it was really interesting because what it taught me was he was very open to us telling him the stories that we needed to create to get him in the Financial Times. And what was interesting, if you created those stories and they were good enough for the FT, they went everywhere else as well. So one of the stories, I'll give you one example, was he at that time said, look, technology developers are going to be the rock stars of the future, without a doubt. And this, as I say, was late 90s. He said, these guys are going to be worth millions because this is the trajectory of technology. And so at that point, it was still lots of buzz around city traders, etc., and bonuses. He said, I want to be the first guy in the UK who pays a developer £1 million bonus because that's the value that he's delivered to my. And that was the story. It was like he was just there saying, I will pay a developer £1 million because that will be the value that they delivered to the organisation. And that was one story that was like, okay, bang, we'll send that out. And, the FT was like, okay, developers of the future, rock stars, £1 million, £1 million salaries on the way. And it was a great lesson in openness to creating the stories that will generate, really serious coverage. And then the long tail of that coverage was, significant. So I thought it was a really forward thinking thing he did. And we did all right out of it as well. So it's kind of cool.
So 2 questions on that. Did he ever pay the £1 million bonus?
He actually ended up selling his company to Prudential, and it became the foundation for Egg, the bank, their online bank. And he became CTO at Egg for a few years while they were setting that up, and then has gone on to start up any number of other tech companies, etc. So I don't know that he got the chance to, and maybe that was his end game as well. It's like, if I'm in the FT every month, somebody like Prudential comes along and buys your company. Again, he's a very, very smart guy, so it wouldn't surprise me at all if that was his.
And the second question is, that seems like a long time to be in the FT for 8 months. What stopped him being in the FT? Did the stories, he just ran out of stories that weren't relevant, or the FT liked someone else?
I think we probably ran its course. We were like, okay, we've landed it. The last one, actually, what ended up happening was, and again, this was a brilliant outcome, was because we did it at the what was then the Great Eastern Hotel by Liverpool Street. He said, I want to put on a conference about artificial intelligence or intelligence agents. I want it to be the de facto, and there was none around at that time. So we actually put on this conference, and that was, I think, one of our last stories that we generated. That was, leading city-based conference around AI by the man who's going to pay $1 million a developer. And we actually ended up turning people away from this conference. I mean, I think we ended up with 250 people having targeted sort of 100, and we're like, is this going to work? And because of his connections, we got some really, we had, I think, Nigel Shadbolt on the panel from, I think it was the University of Southampton then, really forward thinking, etc. And it just, the event was almost seemed to be the pinnacle that, wow, we've put ourselves in the position now. We can just, and this is a small company, attract a panel, attract delegates into a physical meeting room. And, that's a success. And I think probably it was fairly soon afterwards that the company was sold. So, but I'm not going to say that was an easy challenge to find months and months of stories that were going to land him in the FT. And I would imagine at some point we were probably sitting around the table going, right, okay, what are we going to do? What are we going to do this month? And ran out of steam slightly on it.
I can imagine the journalist taking the phone call going, oh, this is an interesting one.
To your point, it becomes a little bit self-perpetuating that if you are suddenly landing these stories, the FT goes, okay, these guys again, they pay attention. It's like, okay, what's this month's story? What are you talking about now? What's the data? What's the background? What's the opinion? And you've opened the door to, okay, these guys actually do come up with some good angles here. And, that obviously then helps as well, because a lot of what we do is about relationships, is about the people who know you're coming to them with good stories.
I've just engaged with a very small PR firm. I can't afford the Hoffmans of this world just yet. But again, I've just listened to what you've said. That's the thing. What is going to be interesting? And I've got a lot of interesting things to say, but where's the context? And how can you actually have that as a timely way? So that's some very good advice. How's the industry changed over the last 22 years? You must have seen incredible change.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly it's become a much more digitally driven activity. We were so physical before. I tell these stories of, I sound like a really old man to our juniors, of sitting in the press room at Tex 100, my first tech PR agency, literally stuffing envelopes with 3-page press releases that we'd all printed, stapled together, put in printing label. The bane of my life, anybody who worked in that era will tell you that the bane of their life was either a binding machine or a label printing machine, trying to get bloody address labels printed square on the bloody labels, and you having to do loads of them. So it was a very, very physical job, even though the essence of what we do, we deal in words, the written words hasn't changed. It was delivered in a much more physical way. You were faxing stuff, posting stuff, meeting journalists face to face at events, encouraging them to come down to briefings, etc. And that has changed to be much more digital first. Clearly the media has changed massively. Back in the day we were dealing with weekly and monthly publications, largely, obviously the odd daily newspaper. Largely we're in the IT trades. They were produced in a much more infrequent cadence than they are now, which again gave the journalists more time to think about stories, research stories, get out and meet people. And that has changed massively. There's so many demands. The commercials around media are tough. And so all of these publications now, being online, are trying to produce more content with fewer staff than they've ever had before. And so the time pressure on these guys is just huge. So the idea of managing to get a journalist out to an event or a briefing, they've got to leave home, they've got to travel an hour, they've got to meet for an hour, it just doesn't happen. So there's been a huge amount of changes in the use of technology, how we deliver what we do, how content is created and journalistic content is created. But fundamentally, at the centre of it is still about good stories. And, that's still where we get the greatest buzz, is when we've worked with a client on a really, really awesome story that has landed in media and then has evidentially helped their business. We've managed to track that through to traffic through to the website, or even anecdotal stuff where we've had sales guys go, I walked into that meeting and they were talking about the piece in Handelsblatt last week. It was awesome. And that's still the buzz we get, is for landing those results for our clients. And that hasn't changed, but the way we deliver that is massively different than it used to be, which is good in some ways. In other ways, I do miss, I do miss a long client and journalist lunch, but, who wouldn't?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because the role of the journalist is now it's more fast-paced. They've got to put out more content. They're being paid for clicks, some of them. One of my clients in Australia, the Australian New Zealand Bank, actually took a very different approach. And let me explain to you. So they had a former journalist, Andrew Cole, I think his name was, and they decided we're actually going to package up our briefings as produced by the bank. So we'll do a press release, or we'll do a video package. We'll take all the watermarks off so it's clean. We'll give it to you and as is. And yes, it's been produced by the ANZ Bank rather than 3 crews coming up to film the same thing. And the response was, yes, initially, well, it's the bank's propaganda, but actually we haven't got time to send a crew there and edit it. If it's good enough to go and we can say, supplied by the ANZ Bank, we'll actually take it. So they're actually owning the story and the message. Is this the future?
It's certainly a bigger part of what we do now. And it has come through that pressure on publications that they don't have the time, they don't have the resources to fill their pages, their online pages, as much as they need to. So we are increasingly producing content, editorial content, and as I say, with the client I was talking about in Sweden, we write a lot of content for their blog, but we're very, very editorially focused. It isn't self-promotional. There's the blog is designed for the end users. It isn't about promoting the clients. It's about talking about issues that their customers have. And one of my proudest things about the content we produce for that client is that now some industry titles take content off the blog and print it in their pages without us even knowing it until we see it in the pages. It's like, oh, okay, they've taken that part of the blog post and used it as a quote. And that says to me, we're producing, good quality content. But it also says to me that these guys, are looking at different ways that they source material for their pages. It's great in a way for us. And you could say, I think cynically, you could say, well, it's great for PR guys because they know they can just produce any content and land it. But it isn't. It's actually great because we can speak to our clients and say, there's an opportunity there, but your content needs to be really, really good. It needs to stand up editorially. We can't just be, it's not an advertorial. It still needs to be editorial content. So the opportunity sits there if you're prepared to write the content in the right way. It isn't self-promotional. It talks about issues. It's constructed like a proper, editorial story, and so it's, it strengthens our counsel with our clients to be able to say, yeah, you can do that, but you got to do it in the way that we told you got to do it.
When I was at IBM, I'd stolen Ben Kay, hi Ben, from EE to join my team in IBM. And I said to the powers that be, can we do a story? So we don't do story on people. So I literally did a blog post. I filmed a video, a 5-minute video, why is joining IBM, uploaded it. One of the digital publications grabbed it verbatim, ran it, and the PR people rang me. You guys, I didn't do anything. They literally lifted it verbatim because it was a good story and it had vision and everything they needed. So we got some promotion without actually having to get any release.
Yeah, totally. And that, as I say, that the opportunity is there for that, but it's got to be, you know what that good content looks like. So yeah, it's definitely a change that we've seen. The publications are willing to take content from us, from our clients, as long as it stacks up from a quality perspective, because their reputation still relies on them being, and actually their value to us relies on them being perceived as good quality editorial publications. We don't want them, their readership perceiving them as mouthpieces for brands and the thinly veiled advertorial, because that reduces their impact and their influence from our perspective as well.
So full disclosure, I've started working with some of your team on your clients and putting them forward for podcasts. This is something I've been doing for the last probably 9 or 10 months now. I've got probably 9 different agencies that are feeding me some good guests, some not so good guests, so I've got to weed through them. But I had a really interesting interview yesterday with Workiva and Julie and team set that up for me, which was fantastic, with Andy Wood. That'll be out soon. So question for you, having done the disclosure, where do podcasts fit in the mix? And we're doing a podcast, I think, probably because you're a very interesting person anyway. I'm not selling your agency per se. But I see, especially in the US and here in the UK and Europe, podcasting can be a really, really smart way to get messages out. And I'm independent. I have no horse in the game. I want to source great content. So talk to me about how podcasts fit in the mix.
They're right in there now. They've kind of emerged over the last few years as a new format, really. And as a new medium. That people are obviously absorbed by, interested in. Huge audiences, influential, and so for us, definitely they're another channel that we want to make sure we're looking at and reviewing. Now, the challenge is, as ever with any any media can be, well, how do we direct into those podcasts that we think are genuinely influential for our clients? At the end of the day, our job is helping our clients deliver their message to the audience that they want to reach. So we need to be able to look at any media and say, well, that media is identifiably and irrefutably going to reach the audience that you want to influence, and therefore it's worth us spending time working with that particular media. And that doesn't have to be a huge audience. And this is one of the things I think is a real strength of podcasts is I don't mind reaching a small audience if it's the right audience. And so I think that's where podcasts can really come into their own. They've got a very distinct, niche, defined, loyal, engaged audience, which is all really, really good for us. As long as we, find them and seek those opportunities that are going to reach and reach the right audiences for our clients. And then it's about, for us, again, it's preparing our clients for them. As you say, it's, you've got to get people who are going to come on and have a proper conversation with you. Every good podcast that I listen to is a good conversation. And it's the same when it's different actually. When we put, say, a client forward for a media interview with print media, sometimes clients can go in there feeling like this is a bit of a Q&A here and a bit of an exam and I've just got to get the answers right. And to an extent, I don't subscribe to that at all. And again, any interview is going to be better if it's conversation. But in a media interview that's for print, you can get away with that because the journalist is going to take the notes and they're going to turn it into the good story. Whereas on a podcast, it is what it is, right? You can't take it, and you can edit it to an extent, but you can't chop it up that much. So you make a really dull conversation sound really, really interesting. So we've got to prepare our clients well for that. And I think part of our skill is going to be finding the people within the clients who are going to make good podcast guests, which isn't necessarily the same people we were put forward for print interviews, because I actually think in some cases we'd rather use engineers and technicians and R&D guys and designers in very specific podcasts because they're really immersed in those roles. Whereas if you put forward the CEO, they're going to get the corporate story and you're going to get the big picture, but that might not be right for the podcast. So a lot of it, they're really interesting channel. We love, and clients seem to love in getting in the opportunity to be on podcasts as well. But part of our job is making sure that they're prepared and the right sort of personality to go on there and have a great conversation. And be not shy of airing an opinion. Have a view. Because that's what's going to interest people.
My one tip for your clients and anyone else you're preparing is spend the money on a decent microphone, because the number of people who use their laptop, and the poor podcast editor, that will be me, has to spend hours in post chopping out echoes. I had one client, actually, who was in their PR's office and it was so echoey. We got there in the end, but good sound on podcast is crucial. We're almost out of time, but I want to run you through my favorite part of the show, which is a quick fire round. Quick questions, quick answers. iPhone or Android?
I'm actually Android.
Window or aisle?
Definitely window.
Online or in the room?
Ooh, God, that's a tough one actually, because I think both have their place. But if you were going to ask me to choose one forever, I'd say in the room.
The app you use most on your phone?
Probably quite sadly, I think it's Instagram.
What's your Instagram handle?
I've got a couple of accounts. One is just me, Mark Pinsent, which is mainly just photos of various scenes in France. Quite a lot of them actually are scans of film negatives, because I'm old-fashioned. I'm so analog in many respects, it's ridiculous, but I've got an old film camera that I like using, and then I scan the negs and put those up. But the most interesting one is I've also, in another analog thing, got a very old Land Rover, a 51-year-old Land Rover, and she's got her own account called Mandy the Sandy Landy, and she has organically, and this is not a word of a lie, I've not done anything in terms of any dodgy ways of attracting followers. She's got 7,000 followers on Instagram. So my car is far more popular than I am on Instagram, and in a way I'm very happy with that. But yeah, Instagram's the channel.
That's amazing. I'll put both links in the show note. I've just had a look at your Instagram. You take great shots. I've just followed you. You take great shots. So I look forward to looking through that. What's the one thing you won't be doing again post-pandemic?
Flying as much, for sure.
The best piece of advice you've ever received?
Work hard, be nice.
What are you reading at the moment?
I'm reading a book called The World for Sale. It's by two authors, and I can't remember either of their names. But it doesn't sound interesting on the when I summarize it, because it's about the history of commodity trading, but it's absolutely fascinating, because I think we understand how powerful some of these businesses like Glencore have become and became, but to read the history of how they found their way into that position and their ability to influence politics and countries and nations is frightening to an extent, but absolutely fascinating. It's brilliantly written. It's written a bit like a thriller, actually. It's fascinating. So yeah, The World for Sale is awesome.
Who should I invite next onto the podcast?
I'd tell you who I would recommend, because I always love speaking to him myself, is a friend of mine called Jed Hallam. He's now at Snap in sort of strategy planning. But Jed he's a lovely guy, really bright, great thinker. But he also created this amazing The Love Will Save the Day playlist, which I just love, and I love the ethos behind it, and it's just become a really important thing. He has also been, I think, a co-founder or the driver behind a new initiative called Common People, which is all about getting more people from working class backgrounds into the creative industries. And I just love his drive. And so Jed is just always an interesting conversation, and he always just changes my perspective on things and makes me think. He kind of challenges me a bit and makes me think about some of my own values and approaches, and it's really valuable. So yeah, you wouldn't regret a conversation with Jed for sure.
Final quickfire question. How do you want to be remembered?
I'd love to be remembered in the same way that I heard people remember my dad when he passed away, and we had his memorial, and they just said he was just one of the nicest guys and always helpful and always had a smile and was positive. And so, yeah, I think it really struck me actually that if people turn up when you pass away and just have really nice things to say about how you behaved and how decent you were, that would be cool. So if people just said, yeah, he was a decent bloke, wasn't he? And nice to be around, then I'm happy with that. I'm okay with that.
So as this is the Actionable Futurist podcast, what 3 actionable things should our audience do today when it comes to managing and motivating a remote and distributed workforce?
3 things. I think they're all related to communication for me, because it is a world where we are more disparate, we're more remote, we're not as close in physical proximity. So therefore, I think being conscious and active about communication is key. The one thing I've mentioned is be as clear and explicit as you can with people about what you're expecting them to do, what you're expecting them to deliver, what they're responsible for, and what you're going to hold them accountable for. Don't leave any doubt in their minds about how they are going to deliver value, and make sure that that's really clear for them. I guess related to that is then really regular, honest, straightforward feedback on how they're doing it. People love getting feedback, but don't always ask for it. And I love it when they do. We've got a relatively new joiner in the team who we did a big project for a client recently, and she emailed me the week after and said, can we just have a chat, and I specifically want some feedback on how you think I did and what I could improve on. I was really impressed to get asked the question, but it just reminded me that everybody wants that, even if they're not asking for it. So being prepared to give honest feedback. And one of the things that came out of that for me was we all, and I've been doing some research, we all will benefit in terms of how to give good feedback and how to receive feedback as well. So I've been looking at some external training for our guys on that as a skill, because I think it's really important. And then the third one, which is again about communications, and I learned this through the pandemic, particularly because one of my colleagues, Chris, who runs our UK business, is excellent at this, is just make time to check in with people on how they are outside of work. Just have a call with them now and again and say, how are you doing? Tell me what's going on in your life. Because again, people don't bring that stuff to you necessarily, but it has a real impact. And out of that has come a couple of key things where we can just, make it help people. Just sort of go change something, or take a bit of weight off, or help them out in other ways that just alleviate a bit of that pressure. But we wouldn't have found out that if Chris hadn't got on the phone and just said, tell me how things are with you, and let people share. So they're all related to communication.
Great tips, Mark. How can people find out more about you and your work?
Check out the Hoffman's website, hoffman.com. I guess the best way to look at me, check out my Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as Mark Pinsent. I mean, I've got that advantage in a way of having a fairly distinctive name, Mark Pinsent. There aren't too many Pinsents around. So a Google search. I will give credit. Anthony Mayfield, way back in the day, wrote a book called Me and My Web Shadow. And you'll know Anthony. And it was a great little book to remind you that you own your online presence. And so the the main thing that I took out of that at the time was buy your URL.
Mark, I've thoroughly enjoyed every second of this conversation. We've gone long. I think I'm going to leave everything in because I don't want to leave anything out. It's a great, I wish we were there in person. I do hope we get a chance again to share a beer in person, but while we're remote and distributed, thank you so much for your time. I think there's some really interesting nuggets in there for anyone in any business to listen to. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the time. It was great.
Thank you for listening to the Actionable Futurist podcast. You can find all of our previous shows at actionablefuturist.com. And if you like what you've heard on the show, please consider subscribing via your favourite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can find out more about Andrew and how he helps corporates navigate a disruptive digital world with keynote speeches and C-suite workshops delivered in person or virtually at actionablefuturist.com. Until next time, this has been the Actionable Futurist podcast.